Where's Fielder? He's gone to the dogs.
I talked to a good friend of mine, and he was telling me about a good hound down in Springfield, Missouri, and I became very interested in it because I wanted to get started in breeding and promoting tree and walker hounds. So I pursued the knowledge of knowing where the dog was, and I called this man that owned the hound. His name was Howard Claxton, Springfield, Missouri, and we talked about the dog for a while, and he said he would sell him, and we settled on a price on the dog, and I called a good buddy of mine, and I said, hey, you want to go with me? He said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to Springfield, Missouri, and that's when I lived in Neponset, Illinois, which was about a 8-10 hour drive. He said, yeah, I'll go down there with you. Well, I said, okay. I didn't have much of a vehicle myself at that time, and he had an old Studebaker Golden Hawk. He said, well, how about we just take my car? And I said, well, that'd be all right. I'll pay for the gas. And I should have said oil, too, because I think we burned about a case of oil down and back. But anyway, Chuck Miller was his name, and we hunted together quite a bit. And he was excited about it himself, so we drove to Springfield, Missouri, and met this man by the name of Howard Claxton. Howard Claxton had hunted up at the Walker Days in April, and that's where I met him. And between him and people I talked to, like Dwayne Clark and different people, they said, well, that's a real good hound if you're wanting a good one. So I ended up going to Springfield, Missouri, and we hunted the dog from about 10 o'clock at night till daylight. And by golly, we made a deal on him, and I bought the dog. I had the banker had told me if I bought the dog that he'd loan me the money. So anyway, we bought the dog and went back to Illinois, and I told the banker I'd bought the dog, and their weekly meeting, the board of directors at the bank wanted to know what the deal was with that loan of $2,500 for a coon dog. They said, are you crazy? And the banker told me, he said, well, if you was the rest of your loans was as safe as this one, you didn't have no worries. So anyway, I bought old Finley River Spot, and my brother and I had been hunting together for years. We decided maybe that dog needed to be campaigned in the World Hunt, the ACHA World Hunt, and this was in June. So while we was working on a project on construction in addition to a hospital, and we was hunting the dog about 5-6 nights a week, and we had him in good shape, and got up toward the time to go down to World Hunt, and we told these guys, we said, we're going down to the ACHA World Hunt, and we got a dog that we think we can win it with. And they just laughed about it, kind of. There were several of them coon hunters on that job. They said, you must be having a dream if you think you're going to go down there and win that World Hunt. Well, my brother had a little 6-cylinder Ford pickup truck, and I had to borrow money from my sister for painting her house. She gave me a little bit of money, and I think I had $135 in my pocket when we left to go down there. So we took bedding and stuff so we could sleep in the truck. And anyway, by the time the dust settled after 3 nights of hunting, and I'd won the ACHA World Hunt at Lee Summit, Missouri.
Well, let me interrupt you right there and let our listeners know
who this familiar voice is. Our very special guest today on the Gone to the Dog podcast is none other than my longtime friend, legendary coon hunter, Mr. Finley River. Many will know him as John Monroe. John, it is so good to have you on the podcast today. I want you to finish that story about Finley River Spot, but I just wanted to introduce you before we go any further, and please go ahead and continue.
No.
Yeah, go right ahead, John. Just we're
Anyway,
just really glad to have you with us today, and we just want to soak up all of this history that you're going to share with us.
Okay. Anyway, these fellas all thought we was crazy. We was going to go down and win that world hunt. Well, we did. There was 225 dogs in that hunt that year, and after 3 nights of 4 hours a night of hunting, we had first place won, and we was wore out. We'd been sleeping in the back of a truck all those nights, and we was ready to go back to Illinois. Well, when we got back, a couple of days later, we went back on the job, and we told these guys, well, how'd you do? I said, well, here's the trophy. We had a 5-foot trophy, and they thought that was pretty cool. And, of course, I kept right on hunting the dog. And so, anyway, the dog was, he was really a good hound, but he had never been proven as a breeder. And between my brother and I, we kind of got the idea that if that dog is that good, we ought to have the dad to him. So anyway, my sister happened to be home from the East Coast visiting my mother for a few days. And we talked with her about it, but we really didn't have too much money anyway. So she said, well, if you're interested in buying that dog, I could probably float you a little money. And this was in November. It was real bad weather, snow and ice. And anyway, after discussing it, I called the man in Michigan that had Finley River Chief, the father of the Finley River Spot, and discussed the dog. And he said, well, I really don't care to sell this dog, but he said, right now, so we're kind of in over the head with some bills and stuff. His wife had some sickness, and he said, I'm going to price the dog to you, which he did. He wanted $3,000 for the dog. So anyway, after discussing it, my sister said, well, if you want to go to Michigan and get that dog, she said, I'll go with you. Well, it was, we just had a snowstorm and ice covered highways, and it was bad. But anyway, we decided to take off and go to Michigan and get that dog, which we did. And it was a kind of a dangerous trip, really. But anyway, we went up there, and John had some stipulations with the purchase of the dog, that he wanted some stud fees off a few of the bitches and whatnot. And time we got done, I had $3,750 in the dog, and we headed back to Illinois. So anyway, it was, like I said, it was bad weather, and I didn't have him but 2 or 3 days, and I decided to take him hunting. Well, I jumped him out in the strip mines, not too far from where I lived. Back in them days, we didn't have tracking outfits and tracking collars. Well, the wind came up, and by golly, I lost him. And there was hundreds of acres of strip mines, and couldn't tell where he was at or anything. And I looked for him till daylight, still couldn't find him. So I went home and got a little bit of sleep and drove around about 2/3 of the day looking for that dog. And by that time I was sick. and I happened to see some smoke coming out of a farmer's machine shed. And I thought, well, maybe that dog might be in there. So I stopped, went into the shed, and I asked the farmer, I said, you wouldn't happen to have seen an old coon dog around here anywhere, would you? Well, he said, I don't know about that, but he said, there's a dog laying over there by that wood burner. He says, I don't know what kind of dog he is. He's covered with mud. I walked over there, and I didn't even recognize the dog. He was totally covered with mud. And evidently, he had been in a hole out there in that strip mines and dug his way out. I took him home and gave him a bath and cleaned him up. And I didn't take him hunting there for a bit anyway after that. But anyway, the word got around about that old dog pretty quick. And by golly, people started calling about him. It was kind of a blessing in a way, unbeknown to me, because Finley River Spot, although he was a whale of a dog, he evidently had a poor sperm count. And he was only settling about a third of the females that I had bred to him to that point. And I hadn't really realized that the dog was missing females. So anyway, I think we'd bred about 8 or 10 bitches to him, and about half of them did settle. But anyway, I took him to the University of Illinois, and the doctor down there was high on that kind of stuff. So checked him all out, and he said, this dog's libido's low and all kinds of stuff. And he said, if you don't mind, I'd like to keep him down there for a while. And I said, go ahead. So he had him down there right at a month. And I thought, boy, this is going to be something. So I called him and said, yeah, you can come and get him this week. And he told me the dog had his poor sperm count, but he said with the right care and stuff, he thought he'd come around a lot better. And so anyway, long story short, I found out later, Spot had been caught in a barbed wire fence and ripped his scrotum, and he just wasn't in very good shape to be mating to females. So at that time, I was really tickled that I had bought the dad to him. So anyway, I hunted Spot all the time. He was a good hound to show people. People started coming from all over when I started writing ads on old Finley River Chief, and there's a lot of people that come from all over. I think in the lifespan of the old dog, his pups really started showing up all over the country. Dogs that was winning big hunts, world championships, and as word of mouth, I really didn't have to say too much about the dog because they was keeping him plenty busy. And so anyway, they come from all over, like I said, and bred to the old dog. And dogs like Finley River Dan and Gaines Finisher and all them dogs was winning them big hunts. And he had females of him that was winning big in the hunts, and they was grand show champions, good looking dogs. And so I just kept plugging along with him, and that's how I got started into the promotion of the Finley River dogs. I never tried to take credit for their well-beings. I knew who had the dogs before: John Shetler, Sugar Creek, Ohio. Glenn Bexler from Corning, Iowa, had a female that he placed in the ACHA World Hunt. And Bexler Supreme Sally. Glenn loaded her up and took her to Sugar Creek, Ohio, and bred her to Finley River Chief. From that,
you
came
mean
a
to
real nice litter of pups.
You mean, John?
And,
I'm going to John. I'll interrupt.
At that time, the fellows all that had hunted with him down around Springfield, Missouri, Herb Karsten, actually, when the pups was born, he called Glenn Bexler and wanted to know if he could buy a pup from him. And, well, yeah. So he went up and bought Chief, brought him home in a shoebox. That's all the bigger he was. And so Herb raised him up, and about a year of age, he's a pretty nice dog, and he sold him to a fella over in southeast Missouri. And the dog would tree a coon, but he's pretty bad about running fox. So he called Herb up and said, I don't know about this dog. Well, Herb said, if you don't like him, bring him back. I'll give your money back, which he did. Well, then Herb hunted him and made a coon dog out of him and bred a few females, but they weren't really old enough to tell exactly what they was going to do. As a matter of fact, when I bought Finley River Spot and put him in the ACHA World Hunt, after I had the hunt, I didn't really know a lot of the coon dog people. But Lonnie Mears had called me, and he said, I didn't get a chance to talk to you over at that World Hunt. And he said, how about bringing that Finley River Spot down here? He said, I'd like to hunt with him. So I did. The next winter, I took him down there, and we hunted. It was bad weather, and I could see right then that Finley River Dan was a nice dog. He was just a little over a year old. And from Dan, why he started breeding him, and people started getting pups out of him, and I was getting them dogs and campaigning them and breeding them and reproducing them. And like I said, I've never took credit for the being of Finley River Chief, even though I knew where they was bred out there in Ohio. John Bixler and John Shetler and Bixler, they got the credit for Finley River Chief. The only credit I ever really wanted was a credit for having the foresight to go get that dog and buy him.
Right.
And introduce him to the public. Every time I ever see an ad, somebody come up with a Finley River bred dog and put him out there for the public. There was no idea or intentions of being jealous. I was always proud of anybody that wanted to promote the Finley River strain of dogs. And this has been my goal, to compete and hunt these dogs and promote them since 1965.
Well, can I interrupt you there for a minute, John?
Yeah.
What I want to do here just a little bit is just kind of rewind the tape just a little bit and get the history of John Monroe leading up to this. Now, you are now what? 80 what? How old are you, John?
82.
82. That's awesome. That is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know when we've talked before on magazine articles and things like that, you talked about how you got started, in coon hunting. Share that story just a little bit about it or with us. And I recall especially you talked about stopping on the way to Hot Springs, Arkansas, when you got married, and you stopped, I believe, at Joe House's place on the way back. Do you remember any of those stories?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, how about just sharing just a little bit of that background for our listeners, or maybe some younger guys that don't know, who you are, John. And I want to make sure that they understand who they're listening to here.
Well, I can start. I can go back to when my wife and I decided to elope and get married, and went to Arkansas and swung back through by Joe houses.
Yeah, yeah. Well, go ahead. Tell us that story.
Many people have asked me over the years how I got started actually in these dogs. And I'm going to start back before I even knew about these dogs, how it got started. My girlfriend and I was out on Saturday night and got a little late, and she said, "John, I was supposed to be home halfway decent hour tonight, and here it is midnight." And she said, "If you don't get me home pretty soon," she said, "we're going to have to run off and get married." Well, I said, "If it's all right with you, it'd be all right with me." So anyway, I don't think we was drunk, but anyway, we loved each other. So anyway, I called up an old buddy of mine, and it was about midnight. Got him out of bed, the old farmer, and I asked him. I said, "Louis, would you loan me $150?" And he said, "At this time of night?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I smell a mouse." He said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, Pat and I is going to take off and go get married." Oh, man. "Well, come on out." He said, "I'll give you the money." So we went out there, and he gave me $150. That made me about $250, which was a lot of money back then. And we stopped by my girlfriend's house. She left a note on her windshield of her car. Said, "Mom, John and I are going to get married." So we went, got married. We got up down to Arkansas, and the weather was nasty. And we had an old, I can't remember what year that Chevrolet was, but anyway, we went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and we got married. And of course, on the way down, I had stopped at Esther Walker's home in Missouri, the editor of the Full Cry magazine. And we spent, probably a couple hours there with her, and she gave me Full Cry magazine. And of course, I had something to read on the way down there. Didn't do much reading, but anyway, we looked up some of these dog breeders, and I noticed this Joe House had just won the world hunt with a dog called House of Bali. And so, back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'd like to make a circle around through Kentucky on the way back and visit this person. So, anyway, we got married and we took off. And I said, "I think we ought to take a different route home." Okay. So we swung up through Kentucky and Benton, Kentucky to visit Joe House. And we spent a good part of the day there, actually, talking dogs and whatnot. So anyway, he had a dog there that I was interested in buying. He was actually a brother to, he said, was to House of Bali. And he had priced him to me. And I said, "Well, I'll see if I can get the money to buy him." And I got home, and the banker said, "Yeah, he'd loan me the money." Well, I called Joe and told him that I was going to buy that dog. And, well, he told me that he had a story that I guess somebody stole the dog from him or something. But anyway, he had a young female he wanted to sell me, and she happened to be a litter mate to House's chief. And I went down and I bought her. I think she was about 8, 9 months old, and I gave him $800 for, if I remember right, which was a lot of money then. And I took her home, and boy, I started hunting her. And come Walker days, next spring, I told my wife, I said, I think I'm going to go to that Walker Day hunt in Indiana. I said, I've been reading about it for years, but I'd like to go there and see what Walker Days are like. And so, well, fine, go ahead. So I did. I went over there, and on the Friday night hunt was always a great hunt. So I decided, well, I wasn't too up on them hunts, but I entered her in that great hunt, and way it turned out, I hunted in the cast with James Merchant. And after the hunt was over, why, anyway, I think James tied with Finley River Spot for third place. And I ended up winning 10th place with that little bitch of mine. So anyway, the next day, I run into this big fellow by the name of Dwayne Clark. And I told him, I said, according to that scorecard thing up there, you won second place last night. And he said, yeah. He was hunting a little female named Sparky. And we got to talking. And I said, well, I want to buy me a male dog, a good male dog. And he said, well, this dog here that won third last night, this Howard Claxton with a dog named Spot, came up to the hunt with me, and he said, you talk about a coon dog, he's a good one. And he said, I don't know if he'd sell him or not, but he might. Well, I talked to him about the dog, and he said, well, he'd have to think about it, call him. So after I went home a few days, I called him and talked to him about it. And he said, yeah, I'd sell the dog. Come down and try him and see if you like him. So that's when I got hold of my old buddy Chuck Miller and his Studebaker. And we made plans to go to Springfield, Missouri, which we did. We got down there, and it was late at night, and we took Spot and turned him loose. The wind was blowing. Nice night, but the wind was blowing hard. And Chuck and that old boy, they had to have a few beers, I guess you might say. And we treated coon pretty quick right off the bat. And he said, you want to see him tree another one? I said, yeah. Turned him loose, and boy, the wind came up pretty strong. So we didn't hear nothing out of the dog for quite a while. And of course, these guys wasn't listening for him anyway. But I said, well, let's drive around if you want to and see if we can hear him. They didn't have tracking outfits then, so we did. And after about the third or fourth stop, I heard him, and he was way in their tree. And I said, can you guys hear that dog? And they said, no, we can't hear him. Well, after the whole deal settled, I'm sure they did. They didn't want to go to him. They just wanted to drive around, I guess, and have a party. So come about daylight, we drove right to him. He was walked across the bean field, a big tree sitting out in the middle of it. Daylight, we seen the coon right there in the den tree. So anyway, we went back to town, and I ended up buying the dog. We headed for Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And after I got home, I had to advertise him and bred a few females. And like I said, only about half of them settled. And of course, we had plans to go to the World Hunt, which we did. After the World Hunt was over is when we decided that actually I like Spot, but I need his dad to promote a breeding program. That's when I got to going to Michigan. My sister went up there with me, and we bought the dog and took him home, and it just one thing led to another. And
well, John, let's talk about let's talk about some of the subsequent dogs that you had down through the years. At what point did the Finley River Pete dog come into the picture?
Well, Finley River Pete come in about, well, let's see. I was getting ready to go to the Autumn Oaks, and I can't remember exactly what year it was. But anyway, Gene Harrison from Woodbine, Maryland, had called me, and I'd heard about that Pete dog. And I called him, and I said, would you be interested in selling that Pete dog? And he said, yeah. He said, I would. And he priced him to me. And he said, are you going to go with the Autumn Oaks? And I said, yeah, I will. And he said, well, you meet me at the Autumn Oaks. And then something changed, and we had to change plans. So my wife and I back then, they didn't have answering services or cell phones. And I called, and I told his wife, I said, you tell Gene that my wife and I are leaving in just a little bit, and we're coming to Maryland to buy that dog. I'll tell him. Well, when he came home, she told him that John Monroe was on his way out here to get Pete. And Gene said, well, I come home early to call him and let him know that I wasn't going to sell him. Really. So anyway, we drove clear to Woodbine, Maryland, got out there to his house, and he was, I don't know what, I didn't say anything to make him mad, except that I come out to pick up Pete. And he said, well, I was trying to get a hold of you, but he said, I made up my mind I didn't want to sell the dog. Well, I said, I've drove clear out here. I think it's 800 and some miles to get him. And he said, well, I'm not going to back out on him. I'll sell him to you. And so anyway, I started hunting old Pete, and he was a coon dog. He was a good one. He had a litter mate named Spike
Right.
and Pete.
Right.
And anyway, I ended up with both their mother and their dad before it was over with. But I didn't get Spike. I got Pete, and I hunted him in all the local hunts. He was hard to beat. As a matter of fact, I took him to the World Hunt in Bloomfield, Iowa. And I drawed two dogs. I drawed the dog that won it, and I drawed another dog that was highly advertised. And Pete, he made him look pretty bad. But anyway, before the hunt was over, me and another guy were Pete and another dog treating the barn. And that kept me from getting in the top. So anyway, I bred several females to old Pete. And people would come and they'd want to see what he was made of. And they'd go away shaking their heads on that dog. He was a good one.
I'm sure he was.
So he was just one of the many dogs that come out of that Finley River Chief. And I could write about him all day.
Well, I'm sure that you can.
And
John,
the grandson.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's give the listeners a little bit of a picture about what it was like back in the day when the ACHA World Hunt was pretty much the only world hunt. In fact, that was before the days of the UKC World Hunt. And in fact, Autumn Oaks came along in 1960. But what was it like going to the ACHA World Hunt back in the day when you were there with
Going
Spot?
to the ACHA World Hunt?
Yes, sir. Uh-huh.
Well, back in those days, that was the hunt. That was the number one hunt in the United States. Everybody waited for the ACHA every year to come up. because that was a hunt that had the most prestige of all the other hunts put together.
Right.
So anyway, after I had bought a spot, that was a big deal right then to get to an ACHA World Hunt, and which I had on my mind all the time anyway. And so they, of course, it was clear down in Lee Summit, Missouri, and it was quite a ways, but you had to go where they had it, So I got prepared for it. I had the dogs to go, went down there, and actually, you didn't have to win your cast advance. It was all total score after the final night.
Right.
The first two nights, I didn't win my cast, and because I wasn't that sharp of a handler for one thing, and I hadn't hunted him that much, but I drew out with guys that was there every year for years at that ACHA World Hunt, and so anyway, that the third night, I was sitting in pretty good shape. I had good scores, but I didn't have a cast win. Now that hunt was probably, well, I've still got an old scorecard with all the dogs that was entered in that hunt at the Lee Summit, what their score was and everything. I dug it out of an old box of mine here a couple of years ago, and found it, and it was quite interesting because, for one thing, the third night I scored 1550 and won the cast. And when the judge went, we had two judges on every cast. The judges went in there, and James Merchant was sitting in there. He had already been in, and he said, "Who'd you guys judge?" And they said, "Well, that Finley River Spot dog." And James said to him, he said, "Do you mind if I look at that scorecard?" And they said, "No, you can look at it." Jim, he looked it all over, and he said, "Well, I'll tell you one thing. This wasn't no made-up scorecard." Well, of course it wasn't. We had pretty strict judges back then. But anyway, James had 1550, and I had 1550. So anyway, and I hunted with James Merchant with that banjo dog 3 different times, and you couldn't beat James. You could in the wintertime, but you couldn't in the summer. Banjo, too, was a perfect night hunt dog. He was go hunting, good strike, loudmouth, good tree dog, accurate tree dog, have the coon. He was just unbeatable. So anyway, I had the bug right then. I had to be going to them hunts, and of course, I haven't went to every ACHA World Hunt since then. There was times when I couldn't go. I had a job that wouldn't let me go sometimes. But anyway, after 44 years, there was a boy down here about an hour south of me, had a young dog, and he kind of went back to some of my dogs. And Buck Creek dog, of course, they went back to old Finley River Joe, some of them. And I'd heard about this young 2-year-old dog. And I called him up and I said, "Hey, somebody told me you got a good young dog." "Well," he said, "he ain't too bad, John. He's just a young dog." I asked him, I said, "Would you sell that dog?" And he said, "If I did, it'd be high." I said, "Well, how much is high?" He said, $3,000. And that was in 2009. I said, "Would you show him?" He said, "Any night." And of course, it was February, 1st of February, about like this. So anyway, I'd heard some other guys was interested in it. A few days went by, and I called him, and I said, "I'll be down tonight to hunt that Ike dog. Come on." Went down there, and it was a nasty night. He treed 3 coon and a den. And I knew he was going to try to back out on me. And he said, well, maybe we'll get a better night some night, come down and hunt him again. And I says, that's all right. Here's your $3,000. He said, you sure you want him? And I said, yeah, I do. Well, he said, my wife's going to kill me. I said, well, that's up to you and her, but I'd come home with the dog. And of course, it wasn't even a month went by. The World Hunt was down there in Vicksburg, Mississippi. And the weather was so bad, I only got to hunt the dog actually one night before I went down to that World Hunt. And when it was all said and done, why that little Ike dog win the World Hunt in sudden death. So that was 44 years from Lee Summit to Vicksburg, Mississippi, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I've just plugged along with these dogs year after year after year and tried to do my best to promote tree and walker hounds. And maybe I haven't done it to suit some people, but there's a lot of people that likes these dogs.
Well, that's for sure. Now, there's another dog that I wanted to talk to you about, and that's the Finley River Joe dog. Tell me about Joe.
Okay. Now, another dog that was probably my favorite dog of all of them was Finley River Joe. I was at Walker Days over in Indiana, and the secretary of our association, and for words for him right now, what his name is, I went down and hunted with him and knew him well. I can't say his last name, but he said, John, you want to buy a good young dog? And I said, well, yeah, I would. He's he's a grandson of Finley River Chief. He said, down there in Kentucky, or Howard, or
Mr. Elmer Harrod.
Elmer Harrod.
Yes.
He said, Elmer Harrod's got a grandson to the old chief dog down there. He said, I think you ought to look into that dog. He said, I've hunted with him. He is really a good young dog. So I said, okay. I got a hold of Mr. Harrod, and he invited me to come down to Frankfort, Kentucky and hunt with the dog. I called up a buddy of mine and told him, I said, you want to go to Kentucky with me? John Proctor, Joliet, well-known hunter. I'm going down to try a dog. He's a grandson to old chief. Yeah, I'll go down there with you. So we went down there, and we took Joe and a couple of them guys that hunted dogs for him around. We went hunting, and we really didn't have too much of a hunt, but I liked what I saw. We went back to the house and spent the night, and the next morning we started talking serious dogs, and I said, Howard, I said, we didn't get to see very much out of that hunt last night. I said, what do you got to have for that dog? And he said, I want $5,000 for him. I said, wow. I said, I really didn't get to see that much. What did you have on your mind? I said, from what I saw, I figured maybe about $3,000 cash. And he didn't like that at all. He kind of blew his tack over it. And no way. And his wife said, well, Elmer, now listen. She said, at your age, you can't hunt that dog. Here's a young guy that will take that dog and do something with him. She said, that Smudge, his world champion water race dog, he was a bird dog, got run over out in the alley, got him killed. You ought to get together with him. You guys come together with a decent price, and that boy will do good with that dog. So He said, I'll tell you what. He said, one more price, and if you don't take it, we're done. He said, they got to have $4,000 for him. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $4,000, and you can come breed a female to him anytime you want to for nothing. Okay, so I took him home, and I hunted him, I guess, about 7 or 8 nights. Never treated a coon. Matter of fact, he started striking, quit, and come in, and after about 8 or 10 nights, I got a hold of my brother, and I said, I need you to go hunting with me. He said, what for? I said, well, this Joe dog I just bought. I said, I ain't treated coon with him since I've had him. Well, he said, I'll go with you. We went to a good place and cut him loose. Same thing. Out there running a little bit. Here he'd come. Stand around a little bit and take off. He done that about 4 times, and I said, now what do you think about that, Lee? He said, you want me to tell you? And I said, yeah. He said, I think you put too many zeros on that check. Well, that didn't make me feel any better. So I said, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take him home and just lay him up till coon season. And it was about 2 weeks before season. Well, he said, boy, I don't know what to tell you about that dog, John. Well, he was used to that old man, and he let him lay in the house and watch TV and all that stuff. So I took him home and put him in the kennel. And by golly, the first night of coon season, I had a buddy from Peoria call. Want to come up and go hunting? I said, well, come on up. And he come up, and we took Joe and went down on the Spoon River and cut him loose. He struck, went on in there, sat down a tree, had a whole tree full of kittens and coons. And I shot one out. And I'll tell you what, he never missed a beat from that night on. And I just hadn't realized that the dog was homesick.
Yep.
He never missed a beat. I never had a man come and to breed a female. I don't care what the weather was. If it was 5 below zero and a foot of snow, I never failed to show that dog to anybody. So anyway, I did end up in 74, 94. I don't remember what year it was, but I took him to Walker Days and won Walker Days with him. And he wasn't a real fancy dog. He just struck a coon, worked it in, sat down, treed, and had the meat.
Coon dog, we'd say.
Yeah, that was 74, I think it was.
Right.
I won Walker Days with him. And I think he had over 400 females come to him. And Lonnie Mears had a real nice dog out of him. It was out of a bitch out of Joe that maybe you remember reading or hearing about when Lonnie had that dog that suffocated in his vehicle. That was out of a daughter of Joe there. And let's see, 1978, Ronnie Henderson won Walker Days with Bear Creek Chris. She was out of Joe. But he produced a lot of good dogs, and he was one of them kind of dogs that you never had to put the leash on. I was in Autumn Oak with him, I think it was one year, big hunt. The dogs all treed across this body of water, and it was getting nasty cold in the dang near daylight. And I just called him. I said, come on, Joe. And next thing you could see 2 eyes coming across that water. He come over and I put the leash on him, and I said, I'll see you guys at the clubhouse.
Boy, I love it. I love when that happens, John. Hey, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Can we make a comparison between Finley River Chief and Finley River Joe? Was there any similarities between those two dogs, or were they typically the old Finley River type dog, of course, that everybody likes to talk about and remember? I imagine they were, but can you compare the two dogs?
Well, in comparison to the two dogs, Finley River Chief and Finley River Joe. Of course, Finley River Chief had a nose that was uncomparable. I mean, I've seen him treat coon that dogs never open on bad weather. Joe had a good nose, better than 90% of the dogs, but he didn't have the nose that old Chief had. Chief was just one balanced, hard going dog. Joe, when you got ready to leave a tree, all you had to do was say, "Come on, Joe." And he'd go right with you. Just shine your light the way you wanted to go. That's the way he went. And on a good night, it wasn't nothing to tree, 6, 8 coon with him. I hunted him a whole season one year. Never looked at a slick tree. And you don't find that in too many dogs. He crossed real good. And Chief did too with the banjo stock of dogs. I had several nice dogs out of Joe and Chief and banjo dogs, especially out of Johnson's Banjo and Banjo 2. There were several guys had old Johnson Banjo bitches that bred the Chief. And I remember Leslie Moore had one, Moore's Yankee Boy. He was out of Johnson's Banjo bitch, and Chief made him a Grand Night champion when he was just a young dog. The Banjo dogs crossed very good with old Chief.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this, John. You know, as people look back over the years in the Walker breed, I think anybody that's been around very long, as you and I certainly have, you think of three names when you think of Walker dogs. Now, there's certainly been a lot of important breeders and people that have contributed, and as the years have gone by, in latter years and all of that. But the three names that most people will think about when they think about Walker dogs would be James Merchant, Joe House, and John Monroe.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
What was without, I'm kind of peeling back the layers here a little bit. What kind of relationship did you have with those guys? I mean, I've heard it said, that back in that day, the guys were more interested in promoting their own stud dogs, and that they were courteous toward each other and all that, talking about the three of you. What was your perspective on that?
Oh, boy. Well,
I'll put you on the spot, and if you don't like the spot, you don't have to stand there, brother. We can move on to something else.
No, I'll comment on the relationship between the personality of Joe House and James Merchant and I, because I don't have nothing to hide. Back then, it was rough going. There was more personal competitive than there is today. It don't seem to me like they have the confrontations that they had years ago, but they didn't have them kind of hunts today either. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that was the only hunt, and everybody was dialed in on one hunt, ACHA World Hunt. And even though there was people like Stanfield and different guys that win them world hunts, they weren't competitive as much as I might say Joe House or James Merchant. I'll put it this way: Joe House never beat me in a night hunt, and I never beat Jim Merchant in a night hunt. So where do you go from there?
Okay. I got you. I got you.
Yeah.
Well, you hear the stories floating around and all of that, but there's certainly, I don't believe, and again, there's a lot of good breeders, a lot of good hunters. There's been a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of good dogs in the Walker breed that we could mention, but I don't think there'll ever be three that will be any better or more well remembered and talked about in the history of coon hunting than the three of you that I mentioned. And of course, James has passed on and Joe House has passed on. Thankfully, John Monroe seems to be doing well. And I talked to you the other day, and you said something a little bit about people thinking, well, maybe John Monroe is ready to hang up the leashes, but you told me that a little bit of different angle on that. I think didn't you tell me that things are just kind of picking up a little bit? What can you tell me about that, John?
Well, of course, uh, everybody thinks if you're breeding Finley River dogs, every dog on your property has to be out of Finley River Chief. You know what I mean? And I've never had the same thought and concept of breeding dogs, maybe like a lot of people. Maybe not, my version wasn't as good a idea, but you don't have to have every dog on your pedigree out of Finley River Chief to reproduce good dogs. There's other good dogs out there. A lot of people, they won't breed outside dogs because I think maybe, I don't know how you define it outside of maybe just a hair jealous. I've never ever tried to be jealous of anybody in my breeding programs. And when I met this friend of mine, I was hunting these dogs, the poor boy stock of dogs.
Right.
Probably as carefully defined breeding program as anybody would ever lay out. And when I saw it, and I looked back in the back of it and saw all them Finley River Chief dogs in the fifth, sixth, seventh generation, I've become very interested in it. And of course, at that time, I didn't have a young dog. And so I ended up buying one of those poor boy dogs, and then I bought the dad to him, and I bred some nice bitches and got some nice dogs, and now I've got some of that stock of dogs, but I also have a lot of Finley River dogs that I've come about with that go back to dogs like Lone Pine Dewey and all them dogs that were Finley River bred dogs. So here I'm coming up behind these poor boy dogs with these Finley River dogs, and I'm pretty excited about it. I'll be putting these dogs out in front of the public here before long, and let people see what I've went back and dug out of the basement. So it's something that's it's going to take a little while to spread them out to everybody, but I've got some dogs here that are well bred with lots of Finley River in them, going back to old Lone Pine Dewey. I can tell you I bought Lone Pine Dewey from Gene Harrison at Woodbine, Maryland. He's the one I bought Pete from. I bought 4 or 5 real good dogs from Gene that were reproducers. And the little Molly female, I went out to Gene's, and he called me and said, I've got a dog here, old Lone Pine Dewey. He said, he's getting a little age on him. He said, I'm going to sell him. And he said, I've got a bitch out of him that's a night champion, and I'm going to sell her. I asked him, I said, well, how much do you want for him? He said, I want $1,500 for the old dog and $4,000 for the female. So I loaded up old Ronnie Henderson. Everybody knows Ronnie. we
For
headed
sure.
for Maryland. We went out there. We hunted. Well, we got done hunting, and Gene offered to buy me off to just not buy the female. He said, "I'll give you money to just forget her." I said, "Well, that's the main reason I come out here, to buy that female." Well, he said, "If you want to, okay." But he said, I'll give you $100. Just forget it." I said, "No." So I bought the pair of dogs and brought them home. Molly had 2 cast wins, 2 wins for Grant Night. Needed 3 more. And I said, "Now I'm going to have some fun with this dog this summer." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm going to finish her into a Grand Night." "Really?" "Yeah. In 8 days, I had 3 wins on her. She won a night hunt. The next weekend, there was a 2-night hunt. I won all 3 hunts with her, and she was a Grand Night. I took her to Walker Days. I won 4th in the night champions with her. I think I won 5th in the Lee Crawford hunt with her. She was a good one. So anyway, I kept Dewey. I think I bred about 50 females with old Dewey. And I've been hearing more about Dewey's offspring the last 2 or 3 years than I have for a long time. So I've been fortunate enough. I bought a Lone Pine Dewey dog out of Oklahoma a few months back. And from what I can see, he's really going to throw some nice pups. I've leased a dog that goes back to Dewey that's 10 years old, coming 11. I'm going to cross him in some of the stuff. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to come up with some pretty nice stuff.
Well, no doubt that you will, John. And we've been at it here now for a little over an hour, about an hour and 5 minutes. And it's just been a very interesting time for me, and I know for our listeners, to hear the story of these famous dogs and to get to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, as we might say. And it's been a true delight to have you on the podcast today, John, and to know that you're at 82 years old. You're still active. You're still actively breeding your dogs. You still have a plan. You have goals. Uh, the simple fact that you won 2 world hunts 40 some years apart is amazing in itself. So I think the longevity of John Monroe has been well established. And I just want to thank you, and we're going to do this again, I hope, with your permission. We'll get back and talk some more about these great dogs. But it's just been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today, John. And, we just certainly wish you the very best as you go forward with your Finley River dogs, your poor boy dogs, and who knows? Is there another name pending out there, or we're just going to call these Finley River dogs, or what are we calling them?
Oh yeah. You're going to be hearing a lot about Finley River from now on.
Well, we're certainly hope that that's true, John. And once again, I want to thank you. And we're going to wrap this up for today with a promise, I hope, that you'll come back on and share some more of your great stories and your great knowledge of the Treeing Walker breed. And we certainly want to wish you many, many, many more years enjoying these Treeing Walker dogs.
Well, I really appreciate the chance to express my feelings about these dogs, and to know and think that people care enough about it to listen to it. So I'm just getting started, Steve. I'm just getting started.
Well, with that, folks, we're going to end this interview with John Monroe, and what a terrific time it's been for me, and I know that you've enjoyed it too. And we want to give a shout out to the folks out at DU Supply for their great sponsorship of this show and making it possible. I'm not going to go into a lot of details. It's not something that they require of me or even desire of me to do, but just say if you need dog supplies of any kind and excellent service from some terrific folks, it's duhuntingsupply.com. And with that, we'll wrap this one up. If anyone asks you where's Steve Fielder, you be sure and tell them he's gone to the dogs.